There was a time, not long ago, when holding a U.S. passport meant freedom. It meant ease, trust, and open doors. Whether you were landing in Paris, backpacking through Bali, or sipping espresso in Buenos Aires, that little navy blue booklet was more than a travel document. It was an invitation, a global all-access pass. But that era, it's slipping away. And for many Americans traveling in 2025, the realization is hitting hard. The world is changing, and it's changing how it welcomes you. If you're still watching, you know the truth matters, so join us, subscribe, and keep it alive. Ask any seasoned traveler from the U.S. this year, and you'll hear the same story. Longer lines, more questions, new forms, higher fees, and a lingering, unspoken tension, the kind you can't quite name but you can feel. It starts at the border, sometimes at the airport check-in desk, sometimes weeks before, when your visa application gets flagged, denied, or delayed for reasons no one can explain. The message is subtle, but it's clear. Being American no longer guarantees a warm welcome. Let's start with Brazil. For over a decade, American travelers breeze into the country with nothing but a plane ticket and a smile. Carnival, beaches, the Amazon, all open, all accessible. But now, that's over. As of 2025, Brazil has reinstated visa requirements for U.S. citizens. What used to be a simple getaway now requires weeks of paperwork, appointments, fees, and uncertainty. The reason? Reciprocity. Brazilian travelers have faced tough U.S. entry policy for years. Now, Brazil is simply matching the energy. And for many Americans, this is the first real taste of what it feels like to be on the other side of a rigid border. In South Korea, the changes are quieter, but more alarming. A new digital system, the Korea Travel Authorization, promises efficiency, but in practice, it's become a filter. Tourists have been turned away at airports because of minor errors in their online forms. A typo, a missing field, a vague itinerary. There's no appeal, no explanation. You're just denied and sent home. And it's not just about paperwork. It's about perception. South Korea is increasingly wary of travelers who arrive without understanding the culture, the laws, the expectations. If you're not prepared, you're not welcome. In Japan, a similar shift is underway. Long celebrated for its hospitality, Japan is still polite, but no longer passive. Frequent American visitors are being questioned more closely. Border agents are asking for proof of hotel stays, return flights, and even travel plans. If your answers sound vague, if your demeanor seems off, you may find yourself pulled aside, questioned, delayed, or worse, denied. This isn't hostility. It's caution. Japan has watched the rise of entitled tourism. Loud, dismissive behavior. Cultural ignorance disguised as adventure. And now it's draw a line. Then there's Indonesia, once a haven for American digital nomads, Instagram influencers, and free spirits. Not anymore. Bali, in particular, has become strict, not about who arrives, but about how they behave. Tourists are being deported for minor infractions. Social media posts, poorly worded captions, drone shots taken without permission, staying 2 days past a visa deadline, failing to register a long-term stay. Indonesia isn't just monitoring travelers. It's watching their online presence. In 2025, what you post can get you banned. And in Argentina, where economic turmoil has created new tensions, visa-free entry for Americans has quietly been suspended. You need permission again, a formal application, proof of income, proof you're not a burden or a risk. Because to some nations now, American tourists aren't cash cows, they're liabilities. Inflation, inequality, and foreign interference have made some countries rethink who they open their doors to and under what terms. Mexico tells its own story. The border was once porous, informal, forgiving. Millions crossed every year with minimal scrutiny. But 2025 is different. The security checkpoints are tighter. Random searches are more common. And U.S. citizens, especially in the border states, are being asked for additional documentation, especially when visiting by car. Why? Because Mexico, like many others, is no longer willing to absorb the fallout of American social, political, or economic instability. When mass layoffs hit tech workers, when housing crises send desperate renters south, when online influencers flood small Mexican towns, the country notices, and it responds with rules, with gates, with caution. It would be easy to blame geopolitics, to point fingers at embassies, administrations, foreign ministries. But the truth runs deeper. This is not just about bureaucracy. This is about reputation. Because for decades, American travelers were seen as guests with privilege. Their presence was wanted. Their dollars were appreciated. Their passports carried weight. But slowly that has changed. Not everywhere. Not with everyone. But enough to matter. Now, in some places, the American traveler is seen as entitled, unaware, dismissive of local customs, unprepared for the realities of life outside their bubble. And that perception, it's sticking. There's another layer, too, the digital one. In 2025, governments aren't just looking at your passport. They're scanning your social media, your posts, your opinions, your patterns, a tweet about politics, a video at a protest, a photo that violates local norms. All of it matters now. In Turkey, travelers have been interrogated because of old posts about religion or government policy. In Indonesia, influencers have been banned for videos seen as culturally disrespectful. Your digital footprint follows you across borders. And for Americans who often take free speech for granted, this can be a shock. So what does this all mean? Is this the end of global travel for U.S. citizens? No, but it is a wake-up call. A reminder that the world is no longer rolling out the red carpet just because you're American. Now you must come prepared, humble, respectful, informed, because entry is no longer guaranteed. It's earned. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe, for the first time in a generation, American travelers are being invited to see the world differently. Not as something to consume, not as a photo op, but as a relationship, one built on mutual respect, not just economic power. This shift may be uncomfortable, even inconvenient, but it may also be necessary, because the era of easy, careless, consequence-free travel is over. And what comes next, that depends on how willing we are to listen, to learn, to evolve. This isn't about scaring people. It's about awakening them to a world that is dynamic, alert, and increasingly willing to hold travelers accountable for how they show up. If you're planning a trip now, understand this. The passport is no longer a pass. It's an introduction. What happens next depends on you. So as American travelers enter this new era, they face a choice: cling to old expectations or rise to meet a world that's finally asking, if you want to visit our home, are you ready to respect our rules? That answer will shape the next chapter of global travel, not just for Americans, but for everyone. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of change the world was waiting for. Let's talk about the emotional side of this. Because for many Americans who grew up believing the world was theirs to explore, that they were welcome everywhere, always, this new reality doesn't just sting, it disorients. It breaks something that felt foundational. And for those who built their identity on global exploration, who saw travel not as a luxury but as a right, the denial of entry or the shift in tone at a foreign checkpoint can feel like a personal betrayal. But here's the thing. It's not personal. It's political. It's cultural. It's historical. And maybe, just maybe, it's overdue. Because for decades, the American traveler has carried an assumption that they are the exception, that borders open for them, that rules bend, that patience is extended. And yes, that was often true, for a long time. But the world has changed. And what many Americans are experiencing now is not a punishment. It's a quality. They are being asked to follow the same processes, show the same humility, meet the same standards that millions of other travelers have faced for years. So maybe the frustration isn't just about the visa lines or rejected forms. Maybe it's about losing a sense of superiority. And while that might hurt in the moment, it may also be the most important lesson global travel has to teach. Now, let's look at generational differences. Because younger Americans, Gen Z and late millennials, are entering this new landscape with very different expectations. They aren't expecting 5-star treatment abroad. They're not asking for red carpets. In fact, many are actively trying to shed the stereotype of the loud, oblivious American tourist. They're researching etiquette. They're learning local languages. They're posting less, listening more. Why? Because they know they're being watched, not just by governments, but by locals, by fellow travelers, by the communities they step into. They're more self-aware, more globally conscious, less interested in Instagrammable moments, and more invested in meaningful ones. For them, this new era of travel isn't a restriction. It's a challenge, a call to be better guests, better students, better citizens of the world. And maybe that's what this shift is really about, a global maturity test. Not just for the U.S., but for everyone who spent years floating through airports on autopilot, thinking a credit card and a passport were enough. But there's another layer here, one most rarely talked about, the privilege of mobility. For many Americans, the idea of being questioned, delayed, or denied at border feels like an insult. But for millions around the world, that's always been the norm. For decades, citizens from the global south have faced mountains of paperwork just to visit Europe, Canada, or the U.S. They've been interrogated, rejected, humiliated. So maybe this isn't just a reversal. Maybe it's a long overdue balancing of the scales. Maybe Americans are now being invited to experience, for the first time, what others have known forever. That travel is not a right. It's a negotiation. And your passport, no matter how powerful it once was, is only as good as your behavior, your history, your humility. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some of this hurts. For travel-dependent industries, for American students abroad, for retirees planning to live overseas, for digital nomads, for first-time adventurers. But maybe this is also a moment of redefinition. Maybe the question isn't, why are we welcome anymore? Maybe the question is, how do we re-earn the world's trust? And the answer? It won't be found in a faster visa process or a better passport ranking. It will be found in the stories we leave behind, in how we behave when we land, in whether we treat cultures as experiences or as teachers. There's also a larger, more uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of all this. America's internal chaos is going global. The world is watching the headlines, the polarization, the school shootings, the healthcare inequality, the instability, the threats of civil unrest. And they're asking, is this a country whose citizens we can safely welcome? That's not an easy question to face, but it's a real one. And until the U.S. can prove, not just say, but prove that it's a stable, respectful, engaged global partner, some countries will keep asking it and acting accordingly, not out of malice, but out of caution. So what does responsible American travel look like in 2025? It looks like preparation. It looks like reading the rules and respecting them. It looks like saying thank you in the local language, not expecting everyone to speak English. It looks like asking questions, tipping well, dressing appropriately, listening more than speaking. It looks like recognizing that you're a guest, not a savior, not an ambassador, not a celebrity, just a guest. And that, in itself, is a beautiful, humbling thing. Because when you approach a country with humility, curiosity, and respect, you open the door to real connection. Not the kind you post about, the kind that changes you. Let's not mourn the loss of the old travel era. Let's celebrate the birth of a new one. One that's slower, more intentional, more reciprocal. Because maybe the end of fast, easy travel is the beginning of real travel. The kind that breaks your heart, opens your mind, makes you question your assumptions. The kind that stays with you long after the plane lands home. And if you're still holding that passport, still dreaming of the next destination, don't despair. You haven't lost the world. You're just being asked to meet it on equal ground. And if you can do that, the world is still there, waiting, watching, ready. But now, more than ever, it's asking, who are you when you arrive? And that answer, that's on you. You never forget the first time you're treated differently, not because of who you are as a person, but because of what your passport represents. For many Americans traveling in 2025, that moment has arrived. It might be a longer line at customs in Rome, a dismissive glance at the airport in Santiago, An eyebrow raise when you hand over your blue booklet in Singapore. No one says it outright, but you can feel it. The assumptions, the caution, the judgment. What you hold in your hand is no longer a universal key. It's a signal, a history, a burden, and for some, it's become a liability. This isn't about being disliked. It's about being reevaluated. Because for decades, American travelers were seen, fairly or unfairly, as a kind of elite class of tourists. Loud, yes. Demanding, often. But also wealthy, eager, free spending. That era has ended. The shift is both subtle and seismic. Airlines are more selective. Border agents ask more questions. Some Airbnb hosts are starting to block bookings from U.S. citizens entirely, citing concerns about behavior or cultural clashes. Insurance rates for American tourists are inching up in select regions. Tour guides are adjusting scripts to avoid political topics. Hotel staff no longer automatically assume American guests will be the biggest tippers. None of this is explosive. None of it makes headlines. But together, it adds up to a quiet realignment, a redefinition of how the world sees the American traveler, and perhaps more importantly, how the American traveler sees themselves. For some, the reaction is denial, frustration, anger. They see the new requirements, visas, proof of funds, background checks, as punishments, as disrespect. They wonder aloud, why us? But for others, especially those who travel to learn rather than escape, the answer is clearer. Why not us? After all, millions of people from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe have faced these hurdles for decades. Endless forms, visa fees, embassy interviews, rejections without reason. If Americans now must face the same, that's not injustice. That's reality. This evolution also reveals something deeper: how travel has been marketed to Americans versus what it truly is. For years, Americans were sold a fantasy of effortless exploration, tropical drinks on white sand, backdrops for Instagram, living like a local without actually engaging with one. The airline ads, the cruise ship brochures, the travel vlogs that made it all look so easy. But real travel isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It's unpredictable. It's about compromise and curiosity. It's about knowing you're the outsider and acting like it. That discomfort used to be filtered out of the American tourist experience. Now, it's impossible to avoid, because the world isn't catering in the same way anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. But let's not pretend this change is only about policies and procedures. It's also about fear. Not just fear of Americans, but fear of what America represents to the rest of the world now. Unpredictability, polarization, entitlement, instability. The January 6th insurrection was broadcast across the globe. So were mass shootings. So were viral clips of tourists disrespecting sacred places abroad. The perception, whether fair or exaggerated, is this: that America can't get its own house in order. So why should others open their doors to its citizens? Again, that may sting. But international respect is not a guarantee. It must be earned. And when a nation begins to unravel internally, the impact on its global citizens is swift and unforgiving. So what happens next? What does the future of American tourism look like? It's not extinction. Americans will continue to travel. Airlines will still fly. Some doors will remain open, but the rules of engagement have changed. It won't be about bucket lists and bragging rights anymore. It'll be about approach. How do you behave abroad? How do you listen? How do you respond when challenged or corrected? How much effort do you put into learning, not just seeing, the place you're visiting? These are no longer philosophical questions. They're becoming practical ones. Enforce at borders, restaurants, hostels, and taxicabs. There's also the financial shift to consider. With inflation eating into travel budgets and visa costs rising, many Americans are being priced out of long-term international stays. And for digital nomads, once hailed as pioneers of a new global work culture, the honeymoon is over. Countries like Portugal, Thailand, and Mexico are tightening regulations. Some now require proof of income far above the average American salary. Others are implementing taxes, limits, or cultural codes of conduct. Why? Because being a digital nomad from the U.S. is no longer a novelty. It's a phenomenon that's disrupting local economies. pricing out locals and sparking resentment. And locals are pushing back. Meanwhile, back home, the ripple effects are felt too. Travel influencers are losing followers as their audiences grow wary of tone-deaf content. Travel agents are being forced to adjust packages to include complex visa processing. Universities are seeing fewer students accepted into international exchange programs. Even language schools, once booming with eager American learners preparing for gap years, are seeing interest stall. It's not that Americans don't want to explore. They do, but the barriers are higher now. The friction is real, and without preparation, many are giving up before they even pack a bag. But here's where hope enters the frame. Because with every challenge comes a choice. American travelers can either double down on the entitlement of the past or rise into the awareness the moment demands. That might mean traveling to fewer places, but engaging more deeply, spending more time listening and less time documenting, asking questions before booking flights, reading about histories and customs before stepping off the plane. It means dropping the illusion of being the main character and becoming the student, the guest, the human being willing to be humbled, surprised, corrected, and changed. This isn't just about saving face. It's about saving connection, the fragile, powerful, necessary thread that travel has always promised, the ability to bridge difference, even briefly, because the American passport still has power. But in 2025, that power is not in where it can take you. It's in how you choose to show up once you arrive, with empathy, with humility, with reverence for a world that's no longer asking for your money, but for your respect. That kind of traveler, they'll still be welcomed. Maybe not with blind adoration, but with cautious hope. And in today's world, that's more than enough. So, to every American wondering why your last border crossing felt different, to every tourist surprised by a denied visa, a cold welcome, or a new rule, this isn't the end of global travel. It's the beginning of a new chapter. And the next paragraph, you get to write it.